I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we dive into a story of love, faith, and resilience with Brenda Helton, author of a wonderful book. It's called If It Hadn't Been for Grace. This heartfelt novel follows the life of Grace Santangelo, a young woman whose marriage to an Italian immigrant is filled with challenges, faith, and ultimately God's grace. Through illness, family struggles, and personal growth, Grace's story is a testament to the power of prayer and divine intervention. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Good River Print and Media for helping us put her in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below this interview. Brenda, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
This is such a great story. It's a novel, of course, but it's more than a novel. This is actually your family story, right?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about the story behind the story of If It Hadn't Been for Grace.
Sure. It is a true story about an Italian couple named Grace and Gio. And Grace was my maternal grandmother. The setting is in the Midwest, and it does span 40 years, 1918 to 1958. So it goes right through the Depression and the Prohibition years. And all the names in the book have been changed. Grace is a shy, innocent 15-year-old girl who helps run her family's boarding house. And then one afternoon, Gio, who's a bold, charismatic, handsome Italian immigrant, comes to rent a room. He's 8 years her senior. He's everything she's not. And of course, this draws her to him. They fall in love quickly. They get married. And after her third child, she gets very ill. And even though she's ill, she gives birth to 2 more children. And this really escalates her illness. And Gio realizes that he's in over his head, being both mother and father to these children. So he calls his youngest sister in to come and live with them in the house to help out. And she does. And she brings faith to the family, but she also brings betrayal. So unexpectedly, while the sister-in-law is living there at the house, Grace gets pregnant with a 6th child. And this unexpected news causes a domino effect of twists and turns, like attempted abortion, bitterness, sacrifice, family indiscretions, emotional abuse, and all that just spirals out of control. She does have the baby, and she names him Junior. But after his birth, combined with a severe car accident, she finally becomes bedridden. She's physically ill, but she's mentally alert. And she knows that she can't be the mother that she needs to be for all of these children playing downstairs in her home. And she realizes that they're sacrificing their childhood to take care of her, their invalid mother. So she can't do much. She's bedridden, but she can pray. So secluded up in her bedroom, she calls out each of her children by name, praying that God's grace would cover them all the days of her life, because that's all she can do. And when the little baby is 9, when Junior is 9, then Grace dies, and Gio quickly remarries. And when he remarries this new woman, of course, their freedom as newlyweds is nil because they have a 9-year-old to raise. And so the boy grows up with a burden that he's rejected, and he's confused, and he feels like he's a burden because they make him feel that way. So a decision is made then that he has to go attend a boarding school in another state. And that's where he meets a lovely young lady with a lovely, loving family. And the book ends then at his wedding, where he openly gives God the glory for his mother's prayers. And the book does have an epilogue, which gives a glimpse into the adult lives of all of the 6 children, then showing that Grace's prayers were in fact answered in spite of it all. So that's pretty much it.
Oh, wonderful. That's some great storytelling right there. And now telling us the encapsulated or the Reader's Digest version of the story. So this is a story that your mom knew and told you about? Tell us a little bit about the folklore that goes along with this, about Grace and Gio, and that Grace and Gio were her parents, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I never got to meet Grace. She died shortly after my mother got married. And so I never got to meet her. So all of my life, I have heard stories about her, not just from my mom, but from my aunts and uncles. And I have heard over and over again, this story needs to be told. She was so silenced by Gio. He was so dominant and he was so controlling. She was so silent. She was always on the back burner. She was so invisible. And so I just felt so compelled to be her voice and to tell her story. And so that really was a big reason why I wanted to write the book. I wanted to be Grace's voice posthumously, yes, but I wanted to be her voice. And so I interviewed my aunts and uncles, the ones that were living. Four of them were living out of the six. And I went to their homes and I interviewed them and I taped their interviews. And I wasn't able to write the book right away. That was in 2010. But I was in the middle of my master's degree and I had three teenage girls at home and I was working full time and there was no way I had any time to do any of that. So I put it on the back burner until I retired. And then I finally wrote the book and it was published last year.
Easy. I mean, did you ever meet Gio?
Yes, he was alive when I was a young girl. And we would vacation oftentimes close to his home. And, he was my grandfather. And I also met the woman that he remarried. She was alive as well.
And so Gio and Grace had a troubled relationship, would you say? Describe their relationship to me.
I wouldn't say it was troubled. I would say it was more challenging because of her illness. He really had to be mother and father for many of the years of the children growing up. So I think it put limits on their relationship and, their communication and all. But, they were husband and wife and they were committed to each other until death do you part.
Yeah. How old was your mom when her mother passed?
She would have been 18.
18 years old. That's a young age to lose your mom, and a very difficult
Yes.
age to lose your mom, actually.
Yes. It was a difficult house to grow up in with the sister-in-law coming in to help raise the children, made it very difficult. My mom was eager to get out of the home. She was not sad at 18 years old to leave the home.
Where was home at that point?
In northern Ohio.
Northern Ohio. Amazing, amazing. And what was it like interviewing your relatives about the relationship and the family?
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
My mother, of course, I knew most of the stories. I was interviewing her basically to get it on tape.
Mm-hmm.
One of my older uncles, was quite the historian. And he told me all the history parts of the book were my uncle's voice. Because he was older, he remembered, more of the history part of the going through the Depression. They never felt like they were going through the Depression as a family because my grandfather was an amazing businessman and he found ways to make money and do things to make the family never hurt. In fact, they reached out to the community and helped the community during the Depression. So when I interviewed my older uncle, he was a great help to put all the historical pieces of the book together. My youngest uncle was so many years younger than his older sisters and brothers. He was the unexpected sixth pregnancy. He added a totally different twist to the story. In fact, when he read my book, his comment was, "You told me the story of my family that I didn't know," because he was so much younger. He didn't live those years. And so through my interviewing of my aunts and uncles, he found out a lot about his childhood and his family.
Absolutely. Yeah, the youngest doesn't really know the family history like the older kids do.
So true.
Um, it's just they're not there to witness a lot of it. Your parents are very distracted by the time they're getting the little one through the house. And so it's nice that he got to share in his family's history through your great work. The boarding house impacts the story and the relationships as well. Tell us about how that affected things.
Well, the boarding house was the primary moneymaker for my maternal grandmother's family. And they had three boarders at a time. And when my grandfather came, he was coming right from Italy. And so he was the Italian immigrant in the boarding house, and not so welcomed by all the others. But he was so bold and charismatic, and he was just so not afraid of anything or anybody. And he was just so bold that he just went on with life. And he, fell in love with Grace, this innocent little girl, and because she was only 15.
He
And
was living in the boarding house and met Grace and they fell in love.
correct. And he was 8 years her senior. So he
Yeah,
was much more worldly wise than she
yeah.
was, growing up in this small town, helping her parents in the boarding house. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting way to meet someone.
And the boarding houses were pretty popular in that era. I know my grandparents had a boarding house also.
Yeah.
And during, I guess it was the same era more or less. And, people would come, stay a while. People would sometimes just come by to get a meal during the Depression if they had no
Mhm.
money. And my grandfather would feed them and great grandfather and so forth. So it's an interesting slice of life, an interesting part of our history, right?
Correct. And
Yeah.
I know my great grandmother, Grace's mom, was an excellent cook. And I know that they all sat together at the boarding house when it was dinner time. All the boarders came down into the dining room. They all ate together like a family.
Yeah.
And she ran it like a well-oiled machine.
In fact, in It's a Wonderful Life, they live in a boarding house, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. In fact, George goes to rent a room from his mother at one point. So it's that same kind of era when, people were of very limited means.
right.
And to get extra money was a great way. If they could tap that resources in the house, they would do it. And people needed the affordable accommodations as well. So when Grace started being very sick, her sister came to live with the family.
Her sister-in-law,
Her
my
sister-in-law.
right, my
Okay.
grandfather's youngest sister, came to live in the home to take care of the children and to do all the housework because she wasn't able to iron anymore, which was a big thing back then, and they had a garden. And so she wasn't able to garden anymore. And they had a wine, the grape vineyard, and they had an orchard with different fruit trees. So there was a lot to do on the land that they lived on. So, it was a lot of work. It wasn't just the children, but it was, it was all of the farmland that they lived on. And so Gio thought it would be smart to bring in his sister.
Mm.
And so that's what he did. And then to make money for the Depression, he not to tell all of the book here, but he took the front corner of this farmland and he made a one-stop area for the community. It was a gas station, it was an oil change area,
Mm.
it was a car wash, it was an ice machine, and it was a restaurant
Mm.
where they would all make food at the farm home, walk it down to the corner and sell spaghetti sauce and sandwiches, and that's how they got through the Depression. They
That sounds like
gave
a
back.
great business. I wish something like that existed in my neighborhood now,
Yeah, exactly.
without a doubt. Having the sister-in-law there must have been tough on the couple in some ways. I mean, it's nice to have her help, but then again, who wants her sister-in-law living with them, right?
And that's exactly right. It was very intrusive, and Grace was put on the back burner a lot. Again, invisible, because the sister-in-law, Gio's sister, was just as bold as he was.
Hmm.
And so she took over,
Yeah,
but justifiably so. She was there to help.
right.
So she helped, but she helped so much that she marginalized Grace.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so once again, she was the mother to these 6 children and invisible.
yeah,
And so that caused a lot of trouble as well.
yeah. Like I said, who wants to live with their sister-in-law? Not me.
Exactly.
And I love my sister-in-law. I just don't want her in my house. Uh,
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
living here, she can come and visit in holidays and all that stuff. I don't want to get me in trouble
Understood.
or you in trouble.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this. What role did faith play in the family and in the relationship?
Mm. It played a big part when the family had no faith. When the sister-in-law came to live in the home, she introduced faith. Gio saw something in her initially, and he wanted it, and he noticed the difference. Um, she helped make some of the food for the gas station down at the corner on their land that's made the dinners. He saw something, as he had to work closely with her, obviously, and he saw something different in her, and he just watched from afar. And then one day he asked her, you know I don't understand your reactions, and I don't understand your attitude. And so she had a chance to tell him about her faith, and he liked it, and he thought, I want that. And so she told him what to do. She said, you need to read your Bible. It's an old book. It's not just an old book, but it's eternal. Read your Bible and find a good church that you can connect with. So he did. So he went to one church, hated it. Went to another church, hated it. Went to a third church and loved it. And then, one by one, he brought his children. Not Grace, but he brought his children. He brought his oldest son, who I was not able to interview because he had passed away. And he he loved it. And then he brought his daughter, and the daughter connected in. And then Grace, and one by one, and before you know it, the whole family was going to church. He bought Bibles for all of them. It was a wonderful experience. And then, of course, because it was the Depression and people didn't have a lot of gas money and all of that, and they lived out pretty far in the farmland, they started having church in their house. And so they did that for a while. And yeah, so it all started from the sister-in-law coming to live there, but betrayal ended up happening. So, and they'll have to read the book to
I was
understand
going
what
to say,
that
well,
is.
that's the most intriguing part. When you say betrayal, we're like, how were people betrayed? We want to know about it. But you're right. Let's save it for the book because that's a very, very intriguing part of the story. Um, Talk about, if you would, God's grace in shaping events of the story and the characters' lives and the people's lives.
Oh, okay. Well, grace, first of all, people would need to understand what grace is. So, grace is when God gives us good things that we don't deserve. That's what grace is. It's different than mercy, it's different than blessings. Um, so, when they started having church in the house, then they found out that, well, of course, Gio, being bold and controlling, assigned duties to his children to be participants in this church service that they had at home. So the oldest boy was the preacher. And the next boy, the next son down, was the song leader. Mm. And the oldest girl was the prayer warrior. She was the one who was going to do all of the praying for the people, the sick people, the needy people, all of that. And so they literally developed into these roles that were assigned to them. They literally researched and they dug into Bible verses and they became quite good at what they did. And those older children, the preacher, the song leader, the prayer warrior sister, showed by example to the younger children God's grace, God's mercy, God's blessings. And they literally all joined in. And they would set up chairs and, 40 people from the neighborhood, from the community would come. And they just had, a wonderful time.
Amazing. That's such an intriguing part of the story as well. Let's talk a little bit about Gio's cultural background and being an Italian immigrant. Did he face prejudice in that era? Was it an obstacle to him? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think he was just so bold that he didn't care. He was an extremely hard worker, a workaholic, bricklayer, Italian bricklayer. If he was, called out for being an Italian, I don't really think he would care. I think he would stand his ground. I think he was proud of his roots and where he came and his family. And he was certainly prosperous. He was a great businessman, very great business head, mind. I don't think he felt like he had anything to be embarrassed about. And I don't think he crumbled under any bullying. If there was any, I don't remember my mom ever telling me anything like that. And if there was, I don't think that he would have crumbled under it. I think he was pretty bold.
Did you research his background as far as how he came to get to America?
Not so much, because I wanted to start the story. I knew I wanted to start the story with him pulling up at the boarding house on his motorcycle. I knew that's where I wanted to start the story. And that's sort of like my writing style, where I write the first chapter. In fact, I was so eager to start this book that when I interviewed my youngest uncle who lives in the West, I wrote the first chapter on the plane flying home back to Cincinnati. I started right away. And, I don't know, it just went from there. I just went from relative to relative and put it all together. And
yeah, it's amazing. The stories of all of our families in many ways would probably be very intriguing. There's always this one or that one in the family was infamous or famous for that. So I think this will spark others to have interest in their families and their history, know where they came from. It'll help you know where you're going a little bit. Tell us what you think the appeal to readers will be for this book.
Well, I think the appeal will be to have a grandmother or a mother pray, the value of the grandma or the mother's prayers more than the father. There's value in those prayers, and that God's grace can cover you in the most awful of situations, in the most dysfunctional kind of families, in areas that you think and you feel that you're really stuck. God's grace can cover you. It's sufficient, and I that's the story I really want to get out there. I want to get Grace's voice out there. I want people to know how important it is to pray and to dig into that old book, get that old book out, dust it off, because it's the oldest book of all times on the bookshelves.
Exactly. And you said the family didn't have much religion until Gio witnessed the power of it. And has now that filtered through the family? I'd imagine all of you guys are people of faith now, right?
Yes. And in the epilogue of the book, uh, when Grace was praying from her bed that God's grace would cover her children all the days of their lives, that's exactly what did happen. All six of those children married Christian people and, had children, raised them with faith. And in fact, we just had a cousin reunion, and it was of that side of the family. And it was wonderful to see. It was over a weekend, and we rented a big chalet in Tennessee. And on the Sunday that we were there, we went down into the theater room of the chalet, and we all had church together. And we were coming from all different states in the United States, literally north, south, east, and west. And we all came together in Tennessee. And it was so wonderful to almost honor our mothers and fathers, of these six children coming together. There's 15 first cousins and their spouses, of course. And some of them weren't able to make it, but the majority of them did. And it was wonderful to come together and to share and just worship together. It was wonderful.
Now you're the
wonderful
keeper of the
experience.
history, which is wonderful as well. Yeah. In
I don't
every
know.
family, there's one sister or brother or aunt or uncle or somebody who knows the history of the family. Nobody knows it better than you now. And
Oh,
hopefully they all buy your book, or you gave them a book at the reunion, because certainly they have vested interest in the contents. That's for sure. Amazing. Have you envisioned this as a film? It's very cinematic when you see Gio going to the boarding house looking for a place to stay as an opening scene. Have you envisioned it as a movie, perhaps?
I have. I envisioned it as a movie way back when my mother would tell us the stories.
Hmm.
Everybody that was sat around and listened to my mom's stories would say, "This sounds like a movie.
Yeah.
This is the craziest family that turned out so great. Wow, this sounds just like a movie." And yes, and as I wrote it, I felt that way from the first chapter all the way through. And I wrote the book in according to the homes that they lived in, not necessarily chapter one, chapter two, but I wrote it in the homes by the homes that they lived in. And yeah, and it is 92,000 words. It has six children in this family. It is, spans 4 decades. It is a lot of information. And I really think it could be a TV series. It covers a lot of information.
Yep. It's an epic tale. Absolutely. And it's all true, fictionalized here and there to protect the
Right.
innocent. And it's a terrific story. It's called If It Hadn't Been for Grace. It is a heartfelt novel that follows the life of Grace Santangelo, a young woman whose marriage to an Italian immigrant named Gio is filled with challenges, faith, and ultimately God's grace. Through illness, family struggles, and personal growth, Grace's story is a testament to the power of prayer and divine intervention. You will love this story. You will recognize your own family in this family, and it'll get you curious about your own family as well. Maybe you'll want to do what Brenda did, which is start interviewing some of those aunts and uncles, grandpas and stuff. They've got some stories to tell, that's for sure. Brenda, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
You're welcome. It has been wonderful meeting you.
It's been great meeting you as well, talking with you, hearing your stories. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.